Okay, guys, we're going to get started, if we may. No? Okay. All right. Listen, thank you all very much. It's wonderful to see you all today. I'm delighted to welcome you as part of Research Week 2025 to the University of Limerick. So we have a very busy session today. My job is to keep us on time. So we have a series of quick fire rounds and then a panel discussion. The title of our presentation today is Physical Activity for Health on the Global Stage. And just a little introduction to PAfH. The Physical Activity for Health Research Centre was established in 2019 by Professor Alan Donnelly. And since then, we've been working to build our vision is to build ourselves as world leaders in research excellence with real-world impact in policy and practice. And our mission is to continue to build an interdisciplinary hub. And I think that's really, really important because we're not starting with a blank slate. We started with multidisciplinary researchers. We're at the interdisciplinary stage, and our aim or our vision will be transdisciplinary research, where we are working across disciplines to really understand what influences physical activity for health and how to implement it fully. We have three pillars in the Physical Activity for Health Research Centre. The first pillar is on research excellence and impact, and this focuses on enhancing our research funding, enhancing or maximising our research output, and developing really robust and excellent research. Capacity building is our second pillar, and this is supporting emerging career researchers and really enhancing the student experience in a collaborative fashion. And aligned, both of these pillars are aligned to our third pillar, which is on internationalisation, where the aim is to build international renown, to put PAfH on the world map in terms of its being leaders in the field of physical activity for research. And I'm very happy to say we're well on our way to doing that. We want to advance the whole state of the art in relation to physical activity and its research, its policy, and its practice. We have 5 themes, and you'll see as we go through the presentations, each of the presentation maps to our different themes. The first theme is on measurement and physical activity. And this is around robust, reliable, and consistently accurate and good measurement. The second one is around biomedicine of physical activity, and this is led by Professor Brian Carson, and this is to do with understanding the mechanisms through which physical activity works on health. The third thematic area, led by myself, is on policies and intervention development. The fourth thematic area, led by Professor Matthew Herring, is around exercise is medicine and more, really focusing on special populations. And the final thematic area is on active and sustainable mobility. So you'll hear presentations from all of those over the next few minutes. And finally, we were awarded centre status in the university in 2003. And last year, we were identified as a priority area of the Health Research Institute in the university. You can see it highlighted there at the bottom of the slide. We also received the UL President's Research and Excellence Award for Outstanding Research Collaboration. But we're all about the people. And here you can see us at the launch of the Physical Activity for Health Research Centre. You can see our core members, our PIs. You can see our research staff, our postdoctoral researchers. You can see our postgraduate students. And equally, we have some of our international guests in this photograph. PAfH is all about the people and bringing them together. So without further ado, my 3 minutes is up. And I'm moving to the first presentation, which is from our postgraduate student, Saba.
Hi everyone, I'm Saba Tusunijad. I'm a first-year PhD candidate at PAfH. I'm doing a Marie Curie PhD project called INDEEP, and I'm going to give you an overview of what INDEEP is and what we do. So what is INDEEP? It's intervention on the determinants of an expertise in physical activity behaviors. As I said, it's a Marie Curie doctoral network project. We are 10 PhD candidates across 6 European countries and 8 European universities, and we also have several international partners. So what's our mission and our aims? So we have the mission to empower research and education on physical activity behaviors by bringing together policy, science, and practice. The aims. So there are several aims across each of the PhD projects, but there are a few aims that we all have in common. So we would like to collect data on different determinants of physical activity behaviors in 5 European countries, including Ireland, which will happen in autumn, and also Norway, Belgium, Germany, and Portugal. We would like to harmonize the data collection methodologies for physical activity behaviors and the determinants, and we would also like to develop an evidence-based intervention toolkit for both practitioners and policymakers. So what data we will collect? We will collect data on the determinants, interpersonal, environmental, genetic, and policy determinants. And interpersonal determinants will be collected through questionnaires and surveys. Environmental determinants will be collected by EMA, or environmental momentary assessment, and GPS. Genetic determinants by DNA swabs, and policy determinants by interviewing policymakers in different countries. We will collect this data in adolescents between the age of 12 and 14. And there are 2 caregivers or parents, 1 sibling, and 1 friend. And this data will be collected from 50 families in each of the countries, and it will be 250 in total. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ciara Grady. I'm a PhD student in the PAfH Research Centre, and I'm going to be talking about the Communicate study, which is about communicating physical activity messages with adolescents. So I know I'm preaching to the converted here today when I talk about adolescents' physical inactivity levels, but bear with me. 1 in 5 teenagers do enough physical activity to get the essential health benefits. Schools are ideal physical activity promoting settings, and a whole of school approach to physical activity promotion is considered gold standard. The Active School Flag programme here in Ireland is an example of a multi-component, multi-level whole of school physical activity programme. Physical inactivity is a complex challenge, and there is no single solution, but what we do know is that adolescents' health literacy levels and their knowledge and awareness about physical activity are low or at best satisfactory, and physically educated students are physically active students. So my research set out to understand how we can effectively communicate physical activity messages with adolescents once and for all. We used 3 steps to answer this question. The first was to understand how we could understand how communication of physical activity messages was operationalised, and this was done through 2 different studies. The first was a desk-based scoping review of the literature to determine how physical activity messages have been communicated to date and to make future recommendations. The second was a case study approach with Active School Flag schools, involving an online survey with students to measure their health literacy and their knowledge and awareness about physical activity, and also to talk to the whole school programme implementers to see how they were communicating physical activity messages. The second involved the co-creation of tools and resources with school stakeholders for them to use to improve their communication of physical activity messages. We then are currently testing the co-created Communicate toolkit to understand if it is feasible and acceptable for use in these schools. For the purpose of today, I'm just going to focus on the co-created toolkit. So we are hypothesising that by providing whole of school programme implementers like those in the Active School Flag programme with the Communicate toolkit, they will be able to raise awareness about physical activity, recognise best practice when it comes to communicating physical activity messages, and then also increase their capacity for communication. This will improve their communication skills. It will help put greater emphasis on the whole school programme and put clear plans and procedures in place for communication within the school. This will in turn create a more knowledgeable, aware, motivated, confident and socially acceptable for physical activity whole of school environment. Stay tuned for more on the Communicate toolkit soon. Thank you.
How are we doing, guys? My name is Pádraig Rowcliffe and I'm a postdoc working in the Physical Activity for Health Research Centre. And today I'm going to present to you on the PAfH project, which aims to maximise the implementation of evidence-based physical activity programmes to address population levels of physical activity. So in public health, we know that the effectiveness of evidence-based programmes are influenced by a range of socio-economic biases, leading to health inequalities in the population. Interventions that are based solely on evidence of efficacy often fail to have the same impact on population-driven outcomes due to poor implementation processes. Barriers to implementation of physical activity interventions range the full scale of the socio-ecological model, such as individual, interpersonal, governmental and policy-driven barriers. Therefore, the aims of this research is to look at effective physical activity interventions, to adapt those physical activity interventions to new contexts, to look at potential barriers to implementation, and finally, to develop mitigation strategies to overcome such barriers. This research is segregated into 3 key work packages, but first it's conducted in collaboration with 5 local sports partnerships nationwide, and in particular the active cities departments within each of those local sports partnerships, namely in Cork, Dublin, Galway, Limerick and Waterford. Sport Ireland's Active Cities project is underpinned by the World Health Organization's Global Action Plan for Physical Activity, which aims to ensure that those who are least active becomes more active. Therefore, this research is segregated into 3 key work packages. Work package 1 very much focuses on developing a physical activity repository, and in that, selecting a physical activity programme for each implementation site. Work package 2 revolves around adapting those physical activity programmes, so that might include cultural adaptations, maybe environmental adaptations, as well as tailoring of those physical activity interventions. Work package 3 will revolve around developing an implementation plan, as well as an evaluation plan, which includes a process evaluation. So far we're about halfway through work package 1, whereby we have developed the physical activity repository, which includes a total of 92 evidence-informed programmes and a total of 21 evidence-based programmes. And really what we mean by evidence-based programmes is that there is an evidence base indicating the effectiveness of those programmes. From here we'll move into phase 2, whereby we'll run workshops with key stakeholder groups to look at the potential alignment of those physical activity interventions with the local context, as well as feasibility and equity considerations. We'll finish with focus groups with the target population group to determine the potential acceptability and effectiveness of those programmes. This information will inform the selection of a physical activity programme for each implementation site and will further inform the development of Work Package 2 and Work Package 3. Thank you.
Thanks. So really interesting presentation so far, and I will talk to you now about physical activity policy evaluation. This is also a research that is funded by a Marie Curie program, but a postdoctoral fellowship, so an individual fellowship. I am a political scientist by training, but also have a decade of experience in physical activity and health research. So that's why this topic combines somehow a lot of my previous experience, and I'm happy to have here in the Physical Activity for Health Research Centers also good structures that can help to facilitate this research. So we know that, and we heard this from previous speakers, that we have a problem with physical inactivity. We need strategies to promote physical activity, and one part of these strategies can be policies, and we see that there are multiple policies at national level, like here in Ireland with the National Physical Activity Plan, but also at international level. For example, the European Union has recommendations on promoting health-enhancing physical activity across sectors. And when we talk about across different sectors, we see here on the right side, there is a call to action from an international scientific network where you can see very nicely what sectors are relevant and important to promote physical activity. So it's the sports sector, the health sector, but equally important transport, urban design, active workplaces, active communities, and so on. My project now focuses on tools that monitor and evaluate those policies. And you see that at international levels already there are multiple tools because the European Union wants to know whether their policy is implemented. The World Health Organization developed an own tool. There are scientific networks that develop tools to measure what policies exist in different countries to promote physical activity and how well they are implemented. There is a second part of my research that focuses more on sort of a case study in Ireland and Germany, and I'm very happy to be at the moment at a secondment at Sport Ireland, that really helps to get insights into how policymaking in Ireland works. And I'm from Germany, so that's my link to the other country. And the final result of this research, which is expected in around 1.5 years, is a co-designed physical activity policy toolkit that should support this type of policy evaluation. So there are some take-home messages, and these are very preliminary results. A lot of them are based on work in the last 2 or 3 months, so they might still change, but I wanted to just share them with you to get a feeling for the topic. So we have an international perspective in the study where we see that the policy evaluation landscape is very fragmented. We see very different tools, and there are some common elements, but maybe there is room for improvement with regards to measuring the same. But we also can see some of the tools have success stories of real-world impact, where they help to put physical activity on the policy agenda and then result in certain actions of governments. We see also, when we look at the national level, we see, I would say, a rather limited use of these international tools, because, of course, from a national perspective, other topics are important, are relevant. So you're more focusing on the national context, national policies you have, limited use of these international tools. So there is a bit the challenge of linking these maybe better. So can we manage that we at international level, also scientific networks, that we measure this type of information that is relevant really for a policymaker. And there is an interdisciplinary perspective, just to conclude. So there is a potential, I think, to learn from political science research on policy evaluation, because a lot of research has been done just in other fields. And as Catherine highlighted at the beginning, it's the interdisciplinary component is very important in the research center. So I think there is some potential in this project, as we also saw in other projects that we heard about. Thank you very much.
Thank you all. My name is Sean Healy. I'm going to be speaking to you about the Parasport Gateways and Pathways project. I conducted this last year, funded by Paralympics Ireland, working with collaborators from the Physical Activity for Health Centre and other colleagues across PES. And Alan Deneen there was in the back was our research assistant, now PhD student, to use these findings to conduct further work. So we conducted this work for 3 reasons. The first reason is that when you look at the latest data on sport participation in Ireland, we see that there's a 22% gap in regular participation levels between those with and without disabilities, and a very significant gap as well in just membership of a sports club between people with and without disabilities. And our national sports policy responds to this growing disparity, and we have key actions in our national sports policy regarding developing initiatives to promote physical activity among this population and sport participation specifically. But we know quite little about the experiences of people with disabilities in parasport in Ireland. So here's what we did. Over 5 months, we interviewed parasport athletes, we interviewed parasport coaches, and we did a survey of 123 parasport athletes in Ireland to understand a whole range of topics. I'm going to focus on one very minor but a significant finding. And that is about the idea of stumbling into parasport. And I use that phrase because so many of my interviewees, they use that phrase about how they stumbled into parasport too late in life. They discovered it too late in life, a lot later than they would like. And our survey data, it supported this, whereby on average our athletes, they played their first parasport at over 19 years of age. Now, of course, you have to look at congenital versus acquired disabilities there, but still we see that for those with congenital disabilities, they played their first parasport at nearly 16 years of age. And we dug a little deeper into this, and we saw that there's a great gender disparity here as well, where our women with congenital disabilities don't play their first parasport till on average 21 years of age. So a lot of work to do there. As you could imagine, for those with acquired disabilities, it is going to be older. So I want to propose, based on our data, 4 potential reasons that are contributing to this late start and late exposure and entry into parasport. The first 2, they go, I think, hand in hand. They were our top reported barriers for entry and that first participation into parasport was high expenses associated with sport and the lack of appropriate equipment. And our interviews suggest it is the equipment that's contributing to the cost, as well as things around transport and travel. Other major barriers, especially for those living outside our cities, was just the lack of facilities and inadequate facilities where I live, which is compounded by a lack of transport to get to those centres where the actual facilities that run parasport programmes actually exist. And the final, I think, finding of interest and where we need to do a bit more work is it appears that our schools are underutilised as an avenue where young people with disabilities can be introduced to parasport. Only 1 in 4 of our survey respondents said that they were introduced to parasport via their school. And again, we see a major gender disparity there, where only 9% of our girls versus 25% of our boys had an opportunity to play parasport in their school. So a lot of work to do. Alan is going to lead the charge in using our findings to conduct some very impactful research in the near future. Thank you all.
Thank you. I'm Ana Barrero. I'm a postdoctoral researcher here at the University of Limerick, and I'm going to present the iCycle project. This project was meant to be presented by Professor James Green, but since he's not available here and I work as well in this project, I'm going to present on his behalf. So what's iCycle? iCycle is a research project in which we are aiming to get more people cycling and less people driving, and we are specifically targeting people that usually commute to work by car, and because it's not only good for their health, but as well for the environment and for the planet. And we are using e-bikes. You might wonder, why e-bikes instead of regular bikes? Because e-bikes help to reduce some barriers that people might have. For example, people that want to arrive at work sweating, or people with mobility problems, or for example, myself, who just had a surgery, and I've been told to not do much physical activity, and having an e-bike allows me to cycle to work every day. Okay, how this project works. First of all, from a point of view of the participants sign up, they fill out a survey, and we meet with the participant to assess which kind of bike might suit better their needs. If they have kids, if they want a cargo bike, if they need a foldable bike to put inside a train or a bus. And then after that, all the participants go on a 2 weeks baseline measurement in which we measure the transport patterns. And after those 2 weeks, since this is a controlled randomized study, some of the participants are allocated to a control group, which means that they have to wait from 8 to 12 weeks, and the rest are allocated to get the bike straight away after the 2 weeks of baseline measurement. They get the bike from 4, 8, or 12 weeks, depending on the group that they're allocated, and then they return the bike, they fill out another survey, and we try to follow them up 1 year later. So far, we're still collecting data, but here you can see some of the results from some participants that were not cycling at all. You can see here in the baseline measurement, and the difference, the huge increase of kilometers that participants were doing after the intervention, which is amazing. And as well, you can see here how 70% of the participants said that after this intervention, they plan to buy either an e-bike or a regular bike. Here you can read other ways in which participants found the e-bike useful besides of commuting to work. And since I'm in charge of meeting the participants to loan the e-bikes and get them back, I'm going to explain you a short anecdote I had a few weeks ago. One participant returned the e-bike and it was fully covered in mud, and I just saw that she had left it in the backyard abandoned, and it was quite the opposite. The participant was using the bike a lot in sunny days like today, but as well during rainy days, and that's why the bike was so dirty. And she told me, Anna, this bike literally changed my life, and that is so rewarding.
Thank you very much, guys. And as the advertisement for the event said, 3-minute quick flash presentations. We will have time for questions after the panel discussion, but for now I would like to move, so hold your questions, I would like to move into the panel discussion. And for that I would like to introduce our panellists. We have Toby Goodwin, and Toby, if you would like to take a seat, you can take your pick where you want to sit. And Toby, as you can see, is a behavioural scientist on active travel with Limerick City and County Council. We have Colin O'Hare, and Colin is the lead in respect to climate change and physical activity at the Department of Health. We have Benoit Cullen, who is the Director of Research at Sport Ireland. And we have Sarah O'Brien, who is the Director of Healthy Eating, the National Lead for Healthy Eating and Active Living Programme, which is in the Health Services Executive. So you're all very welcome, and thank you very much for coming to the university to speak with us today. So I've got one or two questions that I'm going to ask the panel, and then I would like to open it to the audience if you have any questions, either for our presenters or for panel members. So my first question, and I'm being asked to stay near to this, my first question is for all four of you, if I may. And it was, how has physical activity for health contributed to helping your research department, in particular research in this area? And if I may start with yourself, Colin, and work across, if that's okay.
Yeah, thanks, Catherine, and thanks for the invite to be here today. It's great to hear the pitches earlier and be part of the panel. I think the physical activity for health piece, the crucial element to this is that you can view physical activity population levels and you get a picture of how physically active is your population. And if it's a good number one year, congratulations. If it's a bad number one year, boo. So I think what's really great is that when you can disaggregate that into the different types of policies, the different types of initiatives, the assessments of why do they work, and then use that to inform this cohort of the population is going up or down, or there's a particular challenge that the research is highlighting, that for those of us in government departments or other policymakers, we can take that and it can inform the further development of future policies. So it's crucial to go from looking at this from a blank concept of what did we do last year, let's do more of that, and to actually be able to streamline what we're doing and build more effective measures. So that's, I suppose, where we'd see the crucial dimension of this.
Okay, and has the Physical Activity for Health Research Centre particularly helped you with any particular question you might have had, or?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose it was particularly timely to be working with yourselves through the PAfH project that we heard about. And I think if you look at where we're at with our new physical activity framework that we're implementing on an administrative basis at the moment, but hopefully launching shortly, it's based on that foundation of looking at this with a long-term lens, looking at what the likes of the first, the PAfH 1 project, the outcomes that gave us in terms of looking at the systems that inform the programs and how we can learn from that rather than one program maybe went well or went badly, but the system of it, you can learn an awful lot more from that. So I suppose we'd really see the merit in that and look forward to more of it.
Great, thank you. And Sarah?
Yeah, thanks very much, Catherine. I suppose the value of a structure like the Physical Activity for Health research cluster here in UL, I think, was very much evidenced by the presentations here. You know, focused on multiple sectors, multiple different stakeholders, multiple ways, multiple approaches, the very practical, the very setting-based, the measurement, and then also the kind of policy space. So I think that's one of the real values of a cluster like this, because while we're talking about physical activity for health, I always think, you know, coming from the health sector, in the long term, ultimately, the population but also health are going to be the beneficiary of action and of activity and of work in multiple other sectors, whether that's in terms of urban planning, active transport, our schools, communities, all of those kinds of things. So we will reap a huge benefit for it, for something that we do not necessarily have the control, the reach, the hands-on delivery responsibility of. So PAfH and the iPark project are really good examples of that. I think specifically your second piece, just in most recent times, some of the work we've done with colleagues that I see here in the audience around adopting the World Health Organization guidelines and updating the over a decade old National Physical Activity Guidelines for Ireland was really, really helpful. And some people, when we were looking at that and when we were looking at commissioning it, you know, people would say, well, like, can you not just take the WHO guidelines and say, look, these are what we're using here in Ireland? But the benefit of doing the work, the benefit of having been able to work with researchers and colleagues here in PAfH and their networks out into other academic institutions here in Ireland and internationally, is that people in Ireland now feel an ownership of that. There was all that kind of stakeholder engagement piece. So they're not just, oh, we've adapted the WHO guidelines for Ireland. They are Irish guidelines. People have fed into them. They've been tweaked and tailored and adapted for our particular culture and context. And the really excellent work that Grania and Elaine and Alan are leading out for us now around looking at how we measure those new physical activity guidelines here in Ireland will be really interesting as well. And like, I'm really looking forward to. It's always when I'm on panels like this, I'm like, in 5 to 10 years' time, I'm really looking forward to coming back and seeing the change, you know, because that's what it will take. We need to do the work now. There's a pipeline of doing the work. Then there's a pipeline of seeing the impact. So having a structure and a facility like PAfH here gives us the capacity to take that long view on things.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Sarah. Toby?
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
So I'm from the active travel team here in Limerick City and County Council. I've been on the team for a year as the behavioural scientist, and in that time I've met quite a few of the research team members of PAfH, and there was already some interaction before I started. Some research had already been commissioned through active travel. Ross Higgins over here and his team looking at the drive for more cycling in Limerick. We're in this position where we're funding research, we're getting it back, and we're able to apply that to next schemes. That was looking at a particular one, South Circular, which is just about to go into construction phase fairly soon. Other areas, IS Cycle, when I first got here, James Green was onto me straight away, like, how can we connect? And I was able to get our active travel team down here to come meet the team, to see the bikes and to participate in the research itself. And then I was able to open that opportunity up to the wider Limerick City and County Council. So, we're providing people to get involved in the research, or providing those links, and then benefiting from participating. As Anna was saying, there's some really great stories that come out of it, and I was one myself that was a bit sceptical about the e-bikes, but have now got one. I think they're a fantastic tool, so it's we're seeing it on a sort of micro level, but then how do we bring that across to the general public? And it's I think through our work, which is, I say, predominantly infrastructure, but we're looking at what are the incentives and how can we get people to look at different modes of travel, moving away from the car. And all the research that we've been involved in, as I said, with Ross Higgins' team, James's team, we're now also looking to fund some bits of research looking into the impact of school uniforms on active travel, a particularly interesting one here in Limerick with some quite restrictive uniforms for youngsters. And there's other schemes that we're looking to invest some money into, including emergency vehicle research. So it's not just areas that are positive. The emergency vehicle area is like an area that could work against us in terms of active travel, emergency vehicles, putting in bike lanes. It could be a controversial area, but we want to learn. So we're investing in research to learn specifically here in Limerick what we can take from it and apply to next projects.
Okay, and Toby, a really nice window on the importance of national, but also local action, national policy, local policy. Really nice sort of reflection on that, I think, is important.
Definitely. And in my post, I'm the first behavioural scientist in active travel in any local authority across the whole country. So I'm actually feeding back into the National Transport Authority, and they're keen, and they're listening to all of the results that we're producing and sharing with them. So that's then hopefully going to share best practice and you know, that new information be disseminated across the rest of the country as well.
Great. Thank you very much. And Benny.
Thanks. Yeah, I think one of the things PAfH does well, quite well, Liam, is this connection between research policy and practice. And it's something you hear over and over again, Liam, and it's quite difficult to manifest. I guess the fact that there are 3 policymakers here and a practitioner stroke local policymaker on a panel is an example of that. A couple of kind of tangible projects that we've been involved in with PAfH, and I might speak to some of the benefits from being involved in those projects, maybe the role of PAfH. Probably one of the ones I'd point to is the Children's Sports Participation Physical Activity Study, which is led out by University of Limerick. It's a great study, people are familiar with it. It underpins an awful lot of policy, both in the sport and physical activity landscape, and even the active travel landscape. What's really valuable to us is it's not just UL. It interconnects with a number of other universities. It also connects with UCC and UCD. It has allowed us to also create an all-island study by connecting in with University of Ulster. So that interconnectivity of research communities with policymakers and practitioners is really valuable, and it helps the research get into practice. Another example is the iPark initiative, and there's a lot of benefits to iPark for us in Sport Ireland. One of the great benefits was we were trying to develop an evaluation system, framework, approach at the same time as iPark was trying to do it. And sometimes, you know, support is really good, but challenge is good as well. Like the IRFU frequently talk about the necessity for tension. You know, that improves performance. And that was a great process, really respectful, really collaborative, but constantly balancing the challenge between real-world pragmatism. How can you implement evaluation at scale in the real world, and academic rigor? Well, how do you make sure that the measures that you're taking, the methods that you're applying, improve the validity of your measures? And that was really good. And so I think that is another example that I'd point to. I think then just in the practice space, the PAfH plays quite a significant role, and it's in none of our briefs really, maybe a little bit in the HSE and Department of Health brief, but Active School Flag, the work that's been done there, I think is a really good example of bringing another stakeholder in, Department of Education, and some of the work that's happening in that space. And then the final piece is the local connections. We've Toby here, but I know that PAfH and UL have done work, for example, with Limerick Sports Partnership at trying to understand programmes that can get older adults more active. And so you have those kind of 3 big pillars: research, policy, and practice, connecting regularly enough through PAfH, and not just connecting with UL, but creating those connections nationally as well.
Okay. All right. Thank you. And I've heard from you all about how important really research is to your day-to-day job and to really advancing the whole area on a national landscape. However, as researchers, we find it difficult to get funding for research and support for research. So my question would be to you all, what advice or how do you think we can shape or support research going forward? And I don't know who wants to take that one first.
I'll jump in there to start. So I suppose specifically with active travel initiatives, it's funded by the National Transport Authority. You know, this is a national level across the whole country. You know, there are different teams working to do similar thing as to what we're doing here in Limerick. I suppose we're at this stage now where you know, how can we further improve that dissemination of information? And there are several routes within the NTA. So there's the communication sessions that are held across all areas. So then that's an opportunity for people to come together, share experience, and get to meet each other and see the work that's done in different areas. And then there's the further opportunities that exist. So we had these conferences. There's an Active Travel on Greenways conference which was hosted here in Limerick only fairly recently, and we were lucky to have Pete Lunn actually presenting there on the behavioural change aspects of active travel. And following that, I'm going to go and present to him and his team to feedback how the research that they've been doing at that level is being applied in Limerick. And I think that's those kind of opportunities then enable us to scale up and share it across the piece a bit more.
I've taken the mic, so I might as well use it. I think there's two dimensions to looking at this in terms of the links forward and back between academia and policymaking. And I suppose that Toby kind of talked quite eloquently too. When you have a national policy that looks to achieve a specific objective but identifies the challenges of trying to bring about the kind of behavioural shift you're looking at in the active travel conversation, and that kind of lends itself to the challenge faced by policymakers in terms of how can academia, how can research help us unpick those challenges? And they'll vary, geographically, they'll vary by population cohorts, etc. So that's one side of it. I think that one of the advantages we have in the broader physical activity space is that you've got strong collaboration by all the policymakers at a national level. You've got strong collaboration with the research community through PAfH. And I suppose what we'd see is that this gives a second hook where we can go into meetings of the implementation groups with an agenda of we are trying to achieve X, Y, Z. We've got, if it's the Department of Transport talking about what they're trying to do, if it's the Department of Education with their programs. But I think that the advantage when you have that group conversation is it goes from how can we promote the agendas of our own department to how can we work cross-sectorally to try and achieve what we want to do. And that opens the opportunity too when you've got the collaboration with academia, because that means if there are avenues where academia is saying there is a gap in, you've got, a bunch of these jigsaw pieces, there's gaps here, here, and here, that it provides a hook to policymakers in terms of highlighting those gaps and helping to inform what a policy that might target those would look like. And I think if you look at where active travel as a particular example has gone in Ireland over the last 5 or 6 years, it's a really good example of at a national level a need to go in a certain direction with policy that quite quickly hit a wall of everyone in Ireland does things in a certain way and has evolved into that space over many decades, and unpicking that for all of the different population cohorts presents challenges and is, without academia, without policy-based, research or, data that can kind of support, to throw a load of money at something with no real idea if it's going to work or whatever is something no policymaker ever wants to do. So I think that it's very much the case that, both being aware of what the national policies are, what's coming down the line, where are the hooks going to be in those, what are they trying to do, and then also using those cross-sectoral networks as platforms to say, look, there isn't a policy for this and there needs to be.
Okay, thanks. All right. Benny?
It's a brilliant question, and it's one that we don't talk about enough. It's just the resourcing. There's resourcing needed in research, and I'll touch on that, but there's resourcing needed in sport and physical activity. It's the unspoken thing. We talk about setting up networks and groups, and we talk about better connectivity, but resourcing is what drives. We had a great meeting with Sean earlier on, and he was trying to set up, the idea of setting up a disability research network. I thought it was a great idea, but you're going to need resources. You need funding to do that. That doesn't happen just because a bunch of people get in a room. You need mechanisms that can bring it to life and bring it to applied spaces. So I think it's a great question. I think it's something we should continuously champion and advocate for. That's the mechanism by which we do it. A couple of observations maybe that might help with that. I go to a lot of research conferences. I also go to a lot of policy and applied kind of practitioner conferences. Frequently, we haven't yet figured out how to break down those silos. When I go to research conferences, it's researchers speaking to researchers. So people who are looking for money, speaking to people who don't have the money to give them. There is a need to get better at interconnecting these events. You go to the practitioner conferences, and there's no researchers there. So we need to get better at those. And we've seen pockets where it works well, but it's something we constantly need to think of. So always think of that. If you're running a research conference, what can you do to bring policymakers, practitioners into the room? Because they'll help support. At our end, we realised that if we wanted to see good research and good research practice, we needed to invest in it. So we successfully advocated internally for the development of a research grant scheme, an evaluation grant scheme, and indeed an innovation grant scheme. Part of the advocacy was these grant schemes will allow us to do good research and find new things and better understand the problems that we're trying to solve and the potential solutions that might work, and then test whether they work. But actually a big piece of the value proposition was that we would improve the network. So we would get our sporting bodies that we provide funding to build relationships with universities nationally, also internationally. And the feedback from those projects 2, 3, 4, 5 years after they have been invested in and developed isn't so much, that piece of insight we garnered from the research has changed everything. It's, geez, we got to meet these people, and now we're doing these other projects, and they introduced us to these international stakeholders who've given us this other perspective, and we've been asked to go and speak internationally, etc. So there's more to it than just the research offering. because a lot of researchers are early in career, there's also a career pathway piece. We're trying to create pipelines, talent pipelines, recruitment pipelines into the practitioner policy space with really bright people who are, have this underpinning of a research grounding, which is good. So there's a couple of observations there at the end, but I think it's a brilliant question.
Brilliant. Thank you. Sarah?
Is this on?
Yeah.
Maybe just to build on what Benny is saying there, like Benny's really nicely described, what an organisation like Sport Ireland can do when they look at this strategically. I think there's something about looking strategically at how the research policy and funding environment nationally is in Ireland. So you've got a multitude. You've got the Health Research Board, you've got Science Foundation Ireland, and a number of others. The one I'm most familiar with, I suppose, is the Health Research Board. So there's a piece around how do we, as policymakers, how do we, as IPARC or whatever, engage with structures like that? So when they are, and even up to a European level, like Horizon 2020 or whatever, those big funds, how do we engage with them so that the criteria for the grant calls that they put out actually link or connect with areas that we want to look at, particularly from a policy space, because that's what's going to drive what the researchers are doing. And then there's that, what Benny was saying there around, breaking down the silos and having the researchers and the policy and the practitioners in regular communication really helps, because then when the grant call comes out, it doesn't end up with me as a policymaker or person with a small amount of money, or Colin getting a pitch in from somebody saying, we have this research proposal, we want to go for it, there's 48 hours till we have it in, will you come on board, will you sign up, can you send me a CV? And I'm like, no. I will only engage with something if there's going to be value in it, if we have the capacity to work with you, and if it's going to deliver something not immediate, even in the long term, and that you build. So that relationship building is really, really important. But I think we need to look at a policy level in the context of MPAP, probably, that wider, how do we influence the research funding policy space?
I see Benny wants to come in one more. I'm going to go to the audience, so if anyone has a question, if you want to prepare it, please do. But Benny, response.
They're really good points. I think as well, and maybe just speaking to my policy colleagues, so Sport Ireland, we're not mandated to invest in universities for research, right? We're mandated to develop sport and physical activity, recreational physical activity, let's say, in Ireland, things like personal exercise. The mechanism by which we could invest in research wasn't by investing in universities. We invested in sporting bodies. And said, if you have research questions you're trying to uncover, partner with a university. I presented this recently to INSEP, who work in France, and they've been pouring research into universities for years, and they were like, we've all this theoretical research, but nobody will use it. And I explained what we were doing, and they were like, oh my God, how did we never think of that? They were like, just that simple change, that rather than, so we don't give grants to universities, we give them to sporting bodies. And then we require the sporting bodies to build a relationship with the university in order to undertake the research. And so it's been creative about the ways by which we can create those funding mechanisms that stay within our mandates, but allow us to better deliver on the objectives that we're trying to achieve. And that's that kind of strategic approach that you mentioned, Catherine.
Okay, great, thank you. Any questions from the audience? Brian?
Touch on a little bit. Even after I had the question prepared. Sorry, Brian Carson, physical activity for health researcher. We're obviously very focused on physical activity research, and you've mentioned already that PAfH as a centre is quite policy focused, which is great. But I only have to look at your titles to see that physical activity isn't a problem that exists in isolation. We've climate change, healthy eating. So it may be a comment from you guys on the kind of cross-sectoral approach, and maybe what opportunities you see for physical activity for health researchers to collaborate with other sectors that might make it easier for you as policymakers to go and argue for certain proposals or initiatives to begin.
And Benny's probably the second most likely to pick up the mic, so I kind of just beat him to it on that. No, I think it's an excellent point. And I suppose if you look at, it's by coincidence, at the moment we're looking at the Healthy Ireland framework, which has been there since 2013, and we're looking at what's going to happen next in terms of that broader high-level vision for Ireland. And I suppose under that umbrella, we recognise we need cross-sectoral work on physical activity, we need cross-sectoral work on obesity, we need cross-sectoral work on mental health, etc., etc. And as you start to unpick what are the physical activity action areas and how do they link with each other, you know, I suppose over that time from then through to now, and as we kind of look to the next physical activity framework, for example, you can see how you can get to a certain distance where the education people kind of are a little bit imaginative and do a little bit extra in their space. The transport people do the same thing, the local authorities do their bit. But ultimately, it's the cross-sectoral piece, it's linking these things up is really where you start to see behavioural shifts. And it's building it up in a sustained way. So I suppose the real challenge we see at the moment is to go from a Healthy Ireland Department of Health campaign on a thing, or a Department of Education campaign, or an initiative, or whatever, like to try and look towards initiatives that we all co-develop at the early stages and bring together the different sectors involved. So like if you were to look at, for example, travelling to school, you know, you're looking at what Toby's doing in terms of active travel, you're looking at the school setup, if it's the uniform, if it's the bicycle facilities, if it's shower facilities, whatever you need at that stage, if it's the roads network, if it's the ability to acquire a bike for the kid, you know, there's a lot of different policies that you could bring out a scheme like the Bike to Work initiative for students. Now, happily, the Department of Finance aren't in the room because there's a whole finance issue for something like that. But you could do that in isolation and you'll get a certain amount out of that. If you link that up with the other jigsaw pieces, that's where you start to see the hooks and start to see the benefits of having a more sustained campaign that runs for a longer time. So coming back to where the research space sits in that context, I think we're at very early stages really as a country. And similarly, like you said, if you look at the climate or the other points that are on the table, they don't get done in isolation. But if it's that cross-sectoral collaboration piece, and there's a window there at the moment, I'd see, for academia to be able to point at examples from other countries, or pilot projects with learnings at a systems level on why did they work, or what were the key components that make them work. And if we can link that then back to policymakers at a time when they're starting to look at each other going, how can we move the whole paradigm of this into a space that is not going to go under the current setup? So that'd be my tuppence.
Okay. Do we have any other questions, or do you want to respond?
Sorry,
then?
can I just add? Sorry. Just add to that. So, when I look at my area of work, there's a number of strands and themes. One is physical activity, the other is healthy eating. Childhood obesity prevention is another key area that I look at. And I suppose what I would challenge maybe people to think about when you're thinking about physical activity for health is not just physical activity as the outcome, because that is a really positive outcome, but the physical activity environment, the physical activity settings, the structure, the infrastructure, are there? How is that influencing wider health outcomes? So, like Say Food have the food environment campaign out at the moment. So, like in the context of that, when we look at our physical activity environments, sports clubs, sports environments that our children are going into, what is the setup there and what is the impact in terms of that wider child health piece? Whether it's through vending machines and different pieces, what's happening in our clubs, like when you've well kids and happening, which is your 3 to 5 year olds coming in, and the coaches think they're being really great, and they are being really great doing it, but the carrot at the end of the day is a bag of jellies or a packet of crisps or something like that. What's that saying in terms of our wider health outcomes? So, and when I have conversations with colleagues around this, people are very, you have a job to do, and your job is to deliver improved physical activity outcomes, so that's what you're focusing, and looking at that wider space is not necessarily there, but there are opportunities to do it. And and I suppose the people generally shortcut to physical activity being a good thing, opportunities for physical activity being a good thing, settings for physical activity being a good thing. There is an opportunity to leverage that to make wider changes that will improve health outcomes across the population, I think.
So I think the collaborative question is an excellent question. I'd always caveat, and I frequently do this, we can't allow collaboration and the need to collaborate better to distract us from the key question, which is resourcing, because collaboration with no resourcing doesn't necessarily change anything. So I'd echo that to kind of, don't take the eye off the piece that's really critical. Now, if you're resourced, collaboration adds value to that resource. It is better done in some places than it is in other places. I think there's an agreement across all government departments, and I guess the work with, especially with Healthy Ireland, is a testament to that there is now forums for government departments to speak to each other, but it doesn't come without its challenges. I'll use the disability example again, where we know one of the biggest barriers people with a disability face in being physically active, taking part in sport, is transport. Sport Ireland doesn't have a transport budget. It doesn't have a budget that would scale to support that transport challenge. And maybe to the Department of Transport, they've other priorities because they've other challenges to meet. That's an example of where maybe things could improve. The question is, do you ask Transport to deliver on sport's objective, or do you give a transport budget to sport to deliver on the sport objective? And I don't know that. That's all messy thinking. But they're the kind of challenges that occur. I think at a local level, the connectivity is maybe a little bit clearer. It still needs improvement, but we've recently invested in local sports plans. We have an initiative like Active Cities. All those kind of initiatives better connect local sporting infrastructure with planning offices and park departments and broader community departments within local authorities. And we're hearing on the ground that is improving some of the connection and some of the coordination. The opportunities for research, right? The gaps, the bits that are missing. I think scale is one of the big challenges, right? And linked to scale is this idea of resourcing. I was recently on a call with the Office of Planning Regulation, and they're interested in doing work with us. And their question to me was, look, this is one of the leads in the Office of the Planning Regulator. If we're going to build a housing estate with 1,000 houses, right? I can literally put you an Excel spreadsheet together and tell you how many pipes you're going to need to carry water, how much electricity you're going to need, how many roads you're going to need, and I can ramp all that up and tell you that's going to cost you 10 million euros or 20 million euros. We know exactly how much that's going to cost to build 1,000 houses. But he said the culture piece, nobody can tell us. How many soccer pitches, GAA pitches, swimming pools do we need, and how much is that going to cost, and what does that look like? And so I think what's lacking in maybe a university like UL and PAfH and others, this interdisciplinary, transdisciplinary piece, working with engineering departments, planning departments, data analysts to go, hang on a minute, have we put the thought into how do you scale this stuff to be national? Because we tend to think small picture, small programs, small numbers of people, and then we kind of think, the scaling will take care of itself. We're lacking that science in how you scale these things, how much they're likely to cost, and then feed into budget estimates for government to make that argument, to go, look, if we're going to do this, this is what it looks like into the future. The other piece, and we're doing more and more of it, and you've quite strong data science teams here as well in UL, is the data piece, the modelling. We still research in quite a siloed way. The data sets sit in isolation of each other, they're poorly harmonised, they're not collected on mass data frames that you can then analyse at scale. We started to do some of it in Sport Ireland, and when you get into it, the opportunities are massive. And you move from an obsession with primary data collection to an obsession with insight generation, harmonisation, and potentially future projections. And that's kind of where we're at. I'll finish with this one. We had a really good session with one of our NGBs, and they said, look at all this research stuff you're doing, and this is their observation of us. It's all great, you're telling us about the past, and you're telling us about what might or might not work. They said, geez, tell us about the future, Benny. That'd really capture our attention. So we've started doing work in that space. Maybe that's a challenge, an opportunity for research. What does the future look like, and how do we create that future?
Thank you very much, Benny. This leads me to the very final question. I'm going to ask you to be brief because we're coming to the end of the session. If I was to give you a present now, which is a magic lens or something that you could see the future, 5, 10 years down the road, what would you like PAfH to progress? What would you really like to have seen progress on in the future? What's your advice to PAfH?
I'll go for that. I've got two areas, accessibility and infrastructure. So one of the common themes that come across everything today was infrastructure, getting people to school, to work, to university. we need to build more. We are building more in active travel, but it's not enough. And I think one of the key elements that came out of the parasport presentation there was people are doing it later in life. Why? I think you'll find it's because they can't get there, right? One of the examples we have at the moment in Limerick is our regional bus service. It reports to be 100% wheelchair accessible. However, when you try to book a place on that bus, you won't be able to go anywhere within the county. You can go to Galway, you can go to Waterford, you can go to Cork, but you can't stop anywhere in between. Why is that? And I think, research in that space, there is research going on in that area, looking at accessibility and trying to unlock those issues, but I think maybe it then comes to the communications piece. There's good reports done on bridging the gap by Disability Federation Ireland. It managed to get into RTE online, but then I didn't see anything else after that. I think there's a lot more we can do about pushing the buttons in these spaces. Why are we reporting to have a 100% accessible bus service that isn't?
Okay.
That's accessibility and infrastructure. That's me.
Great, thank you. Sarah?
So I suppose, and I know you're under time pressure, Catherine, but I think a systems approach, really looking at, and what policy is part of that systems, a local whole systems piece, and really unpicking it. The Active Travel Initiative, the Sport Ireland Active Travel Initiative, there's such potential in that, in terms of that local whole systems piece. And yet, when we're looking at it in terms of what was presented here around iPark, we're back to looking at the programme space. So it's how do we, so that system, in some way, and this is what iPark started out with, that piece around, systems and looking at that whole systems place, making the connections, breaking down the barriers, making, unpicking what can be unintended consequences of good ideas in one area, will give us the multiplier that might help us to get to some scale, even though we still need investment, Benny. But looking at that, I think that's an area that I haven't seen it being looked at. It's starting to be looked at, okay, but it's an area that really hasn't ramped up yet.
Great, thank you, Sarah.
The first thing is to acknowledge all the good work that is going on. So if I had a magic wand 10 years ago, I'd probably be asking for a day like this today and the kind of research that we're seeing. It's a credit, to where we are in the system, and especially the young researchers who are here in the room. The work you're doing is brilliant. Some of them are not all that young, but yeah, it's great work. It's super. It's super. And it speaks to many of the challenges that we're facing. That's the first thing to acknowledge. We're maybe missing one component. I'm looking at Declan here, and he'd be kicking me later on if I didn't say it, but just the area of physical literacy and the component of that. We have a physical literacy consensus statement. How do we transition from that to do research to understand how that might underpin kind of future sport physical activity? Data. I think the world is moving at a rate of knots. My entire team now, 2 years ago, we wouldn't have been coding at all. Every day now, we're writing SQL, Python, JSON. We're working in Microsoft Azure, in the cloud, working with data lakes. Technology is no longer just the expertise of technologists. It has moved into a space, especially with the advent of artificial intelligence, which will code for you and support your coding. It is an incredible transition, and so I think you have to embrace it. I'm aware of the immersive software engineering program here in UL, led out by Stephen Kinsella. Those kinds of people and those kind of talents could be brought in to really uplift the work that we're doing. And they're looking, we've met with them, they are looking for opportunities to do interesting work. And we give them sport or physical activity work, they devour it. They just love it. It's really interesting work for people who are working in the data space. So be aware of that, connect with that. I think there's a huge opportunity there.
Great, thank you.
I'm almost afraid to go after that. But no, I suppose very quickly, I think one of the, kind of on a tangent to what Benny's talking about, if you look at how young people in particular consume information nowadays and how that's evolved, one of the real challenges we see, I suppose, is how do you reach populations, different cohorts of the population, and land messaging, and compared to how you would have, like, you know, even just 5 years ago, running some kind of a national campaign on the TV or something would have taken a huge budget and with questionable direct links to what happens next. If you look at the demand now for short, easily digestible little snap data information on here is a change you can make in your life to be more physically active or whatever that might look like, that's the future of engaging with the population in this country. And some of the work we're looking at in terms of adolescence and the research that that's going to lead to, if I look at what might that do, what might come after it and what might come after that, that in 5 years would be a really interesting thing here. That or the lotto numbers. I'll take the lotto numbers.
All right, so that brings us to the end of the session. I want to say thank you to all of our presenters on their wonderful flash talks earlier on, and a massive thank you to our policymakers who came to talk to us about their use of research and to give us guidance on where PAfH can go in the future. And we just have something small. Thank you, everyone.